Welcome to the podcast. You should watch this. I really want you to picture the scene here for a second. It is the spring of 2005.
Right.
We're in Santa Maria, California.
Mm-hmm.
And outside this pretty unassuming small-town courthouse, there are just hundreds of people camped out in lawn chairs.
Yeah. And you have, like, fans releasing white doves into the sky.
Exactly. It's a complete circus.
Yeah.
You've got a global pop icon arriving to face felony charges, literally wearing pajama bottoms at one point.
Unbelievable visual.
And there's just a literal steel wall of satellite news trucks forming a perimeter around the whole thing.
Yeah.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into the documentary Michael Jackson, The Verdict.
Yeah.
And it's a film that takes this incredibly chaotic, globally televised spectacle and performs what the sources describe as a cultural autopsy.
Which is such a great phrase. And that term, cultural autopsy, is a critical distinction to make right at the start.
Right.
Because when a medical examiner performs an autopsy, they aren't just looking at the final cause of death.
No, they're looking at everything.
Exactly. They're examining the surrounding tissue, the lifestyle, the entire systemic failure that led to that moment on the table. And the documentary treats this 2005 criminal trial the exact same way. It's examining the pathology of the media, the legal system, and American celebrity culture at large, just to figure out how a trial devolved into this level of spectacle.
Yeah, and for you listening, whether you had a Michael Jackson poster on your wall growing up or you vividly remember watching the news coverage of this trial in real time.
Or even if you barely know the story at all.
Right, even if you just know the vague outlines, this deep dive is going to explore why this film is mandatory viewing. It really breaks down the mechanics of how justice actually functions when the defendant is arguably the most recognizable human being on the planet.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's unpack this. The sources emphasize that the filmmakers deliberately refuse to hand you a neatly packaged conclusion.
Yeah, they don't do that at all.
They don't give you a simple verdict of guilt or innocence. Instead, they demand that you engage with the machinery behind the trial.
It is a demanding piece of media, which honestly is a stark contrast to how this case was originally consumed by the public.
How so?
Well, we've been so conditioned by modern true crime formats, right? We expect a narrative that guides us by the hand toward a predetermined emotional payoff.
Which is usually outrage.
Exactly, outrage. But The Verdict completely abandons that formula. It reconstructs the event by examining the overlapping systems that drove the narrative.
Like the tabloids.
Yeah, the economic incentives of tabloid media, the rigid strategies of criminal defense, and the immense psychological burden placed on all the individuals involved.
And to really grasp how those systems interacted, we actually need to start outside the courthouse.
The circus part.
Right. The documentary spends a massive amount of time analyzing the media environment of the early 2000s. And I want to pause here because it's so easy to think of tabloid media as just like gossip.
Right.
But the film frames it as an actual economic engine.
A massively profitable economic engine, yeah. What's fascinating here is that this was undergoing a huge structural shift. The early 2000s marked the explosion of the 24-hour cable news cycle.
Yep.
And it was transitioning from pure reporting into entertainment programming. You had networks fighting tooth and nail for viewers in a highly saturated market.
And the Michael Jackson trial was basically the Super Bowl for this new model.
It really was. The documentary meticulously outlines how the networks realized that, factual procedural updates from the courtroom just were not retaining viewers.
They were boring.
Right. But outrage, speculation, shock value, those things kept the ratings incredibly high.
I see it almost like an unregulated financial market, but instead of trading derivatives or stocks,
Yeah.
the networks were trading in pure speculation.
That's a good way to put it.
They were minting their own currency. Because, and people forget this, there was actually a strict gag order on this case.
Oh, yeah.
Meaning the lawyers and the key players legally could not speak to the press. So how did the media fill a 24-hour broadcast without actual sources?
By creating a vacuum. And that vacuum was immediately filled by paid experts, body language analysts, and unverified leaks.
Just a free-for-all.
Totally. The documentary demonstrates this mechanism perfectly. Because cameras were largely banned from the courtroom itself during the testimony, networks actually resorted to hiring actors.
Wait, really?
Yeah, actors. To perform dramatic reenactments of the transcripts.
Wow.
They were taking a sterile, boring legal document and injecting it with literal soap opera theatrics. The film shows you this terrifying pipeline.
The pipeline of rumors.
Yes, how an unverified rumor, leaked by some peripheral figure, would become a scrolling chyron at the bottom of the screen.
Which then evolves into an evening panel discussion.
Exactly. And by the next morning, it was cemented in the public consciousness as a hard fact.
It's fascinating because it completely upends the idea that modern social media invented the viral misinformation storm.
It really does.
I mean, this was like patient zero for that. The architecture for hijacking public perception was built right there on the courthouse steps in Santa Maria.
Yeah, long before Twitter or Facebook.
Right. The networks essentially proved that if you scream a narrative loudly enough, the actual facts become secondary to the entertainment value. I mean, imagine the sheer chaos of this happening today.
Oh, it would be unmanageable, which creates an immense problem for the justice system, right?
Yeah.
Because the jury is supposed to be a blank slate.
Right. They're only supposed to evaluate what is presented on the stand.
Exactly. But when the atmosphere outside the courtroom is saturated with highly produced, sensationalized narratives, that legal framework is put under unimaginable stress.
It's buckling.
Right, and the documentary uses this tension to transition from the chaotic noise of the tabloids into the highly structured, almost clinical mechanics of the trial itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting because I have to admit, my immediate assumption about a documentary that heavily focuses on courtroom mechanics is that it would be incredibly dry.
Sure.
If you leave the drama of the media circus and start parsing through legal motions and cross-examinations, how does the film avoid just putting the audience to sleep?
Well, because it treats the legal process not as a textbook, but as high-stakes intellectual warfare.
Okay, I like that.
Yeah, the documentary is praised as a legal masterclass because it explicitly shows you the how and the why of trial strategy. It doesn't just tell you that a witness was cross-examined.
Right.
It breaks down the specific anatomy of the questioning. For instance, it highlights the defense's strategy of dismantling witness timelines.
How so?
Well, the film shows how a highly emotional, highly publicized narrative presented by the prosecution can be methodically dismantled using cold, unfeeling data.
Like what kind of data?
Like flight logs, phone records, and hotel receipts.
Ah, okay. So it highlights the friction between narrative and evidence.
Yeah.
Like a witness might give a very compelling television interview, right?
Exactly.
But when they are actually placed under oath, the defense can impeach their credibility by proving, like, they were physically in another state when an alleged event occurred.
Precisely. And it goes deeper into really complex legal concepts like the prosecution's decision to introduce prior bad acts.
Right. I remember that being a big deal.
Huge deal. The documentary explains how the prosecution attempted to bring in allegations from 1993 to bolster their 2005 case.
Which, from a layperson's perspective, seems perfectly logical.
It does. But the film explains the immense legal gamble this represents. It walks the viewer through the concept of prejudicial versus probative value.
Break that down for us.
So it asks the question, does this evidence actually prove a specific fact, which is probative? Or does it just make the jury hate the defendant, which is prejudicial?
Wow. Got it.
Yeah, by explaining these mechanisms, the film basically turns the viewer into a makeshift juror.
But wait, if the viewer is acting as the juror, how does the film handle the sheer emotional weight of the testimony?
That's the tough part.
Because dismantling a timeline with a phone record is a very clinical exercise. But a jury is made of human beings.
Yeah.
Who are sitting a few feet away from people, sharing incredibly dark, deeply personal stories.
And that is the exact paradox the film captures. It reveals how the legal system attempts to sterilize human emotion into clean evidence.
Right.
And how that effort almost always fails. Through interviews with the attorneys and analysis of the transcripts, you see how the jury was forced to navigate this profound cognitive dissonance.
Weighing the clinical data against visceral, emotional testimony.
Exactly. All while knowing thousands of cameras were waiting for them outside.
Which naturally shifts the focus to the actual people trapped inside this process. I mean, we've talked about the media machine and the legal machine, but both of those engines run on human collateral.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources note how intensely the documentary focuses on the emotional and physical toll the trial extracted from everyone involved.
And the visual evidence of that toll is staggering. The documentary contrasts the archival footage of Jackson's iconic, highly polished music videos.
The stuff we all know.
Right. It contrasts that with courtroom sketches and footage of him during the trial. You see the severe weight loss, the exhaustion, the hospital visits.
It's hard to watch.
It really strips away the mythology of the pop star and leaves you with a deeply fragile criminal defendant who's facing 20 years in a penitentiary.
And it doesn't stop with him either. The film casts a wide net over the entire ecosystem of the trial.
Yeah, it looks at everybody.
It looks at the accuser's family, who found their entire personal history, their finances, their past behaviors, just put under a microscopic global lens.
Yeah.
It looks at the jurors, ordinary citizens whose lives were completely upended, sequestered away from their families to carry this massive civic burden.
And even the fans holding the vigils.
Right, everyone was affected.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, all of these human elements are reacting to the sheer gravitational pull of Michael Jackson as a global symbol.
That's a really important point.
The documentary asks you to recognize the friction between the man sitting at the defense table and the avatar he represented to the world.
Because he was a symbol of unprecedented musical innovation.
Exactly. A figure who broke racial barriers on MTV, a global ambassador of pop culture.
But simultaneously, a figure of deep, complex controversy.
Right. Surrounding his changing appearance and his personal life.
So how does a jury, or the public for that matter, separate their lifelong relationship with that symbol from the facts of the indictment?
It's so difficult.
If you grew up listening to the Thriller album, you have an emotional attachment to the artist. The documentary seems to argue that it is practically impossible to leave that cultural baggage at the courtroom door.
It is entirely impossible, and the filmmakers lean into that impossibility. The trial was a collision between an institutional justice system and a figure who had just transcended traditional human boundaries.
The public wasn't just watching a trial.
No, they were watching the potential destruction of a cultural monolith. This forced society to grapple with really uncomfortable questions about power dynamics, eccentric wealth, and whether immense talent provides a shield against accountability.
And you really cannot untangle that cultural monolith without looking at the threads of his identity.
Absolutely not.
The documentary actively explores how his status as a black man who acquired a level of wealth, influence, and catalog ownership previously unseen in the music industry, how that shaped the overarching narrative of the trial.
Yes. The film objectively outlines how Jackson's identity intersected with the American justice system and the media's portrayal of him.
Which is such a complex intersection.
It really is. It examines the historical context of how black men have traditionally been treated within that system.
Right.
And then it juxtaposes that history against Jackson's unparalleled resources and his elite legal defense team. The documentary captures the distinct cultural lenses through which the trial was viewed.
Because the coverage wasn't uniform.
Not at all. The way mainstream, predominantly white media networks covered the allegations often stood in stark contrast to how the trial was discussed and perceived within the black community.
It essentially presents the trial as a Rorschach test for the country.
That's exactly it.
And I think it's important to note, the film doesn't preach to the audience or tell them which cultural lens is the quote-unquote correct one.
No, it stays very objective.
Right. It simply presents the reality that the prosecution, the defense, and the media were all actively utilizing societal biases and historical narratives to sway the public and the jury.
And by laying out these contrasting viewpoints, the impact of race, the shield of extreme wealth, the weaponization of the media, the documentary transforms a 2005 event into a deeply relevant conversation for today.
It still feels so current.
Yeah, the mechanics of how society judges its icons, how the press frames certain figures over others based on their identity, and how the justice system bends around extreme fame. These are not historical artifacts.
Right.
They're active, ongoing issues.
So what does this all mean? When you combine the dissection of tabloid economics, the masterclass in trial strategy, the profound human toll, and the exploration of these massive societal fault lines, what is the final takeaway for the viewer?
Well,
The sources point out that the verdict stands out because it fundamentally respects its audience's intelligence.
it refuses to sanitize the messy realities of the case. It presents the brilliant legal maneuvers right alongside the glaring mistakes.
Right.
It shows the deeply uncomfortable contradictions in the testimonies without rushing in to offer some soothing voiceover that tells you exactly what to think.
It lets you sit with the discomfort.
Exactly. It allows the gray areas of the case to exist in the light.
And the pacing of the film really reflects that trust in the audience, doesn't it?
Oh, definitely.
It is an incredibly immersive experience. By blending the actual news broadcasts and the chaotic footage from outside the courthouse with the quiet, deliberate courtroom sketches.
And those retrospective interviews with the attorneys.
Right. It creates this layered atmospheric tension. You feel the claustrophobia of the media circus, and then you feel the cold reality of the legal arguments. It unfolds with a gravity that honors the complexity of the subject matter.
It is an exercise in critical thinking, really. The film challenges you to examine your own consumption of media.
Which we all need to do.
It forces you to confront how easily truth can be distorted when millions of dollars in advertising and global reputations are on the line.
Yeah.
It serves as a stark reminder that the clean, morally unambiguous narratives we see on television rarely exist in a real courtroom, especially when human beings are placed under unimaginable pressure.
Which brings us back to the idea that history is so often written by the loudest voices, right?
Absolutely.
The most sensational headlines, the most profitable chyrons, rather than the meticulous, boring facts. And that is exactly why this deep dive into the documentary is so vital.
I agree.
Whether you are fascinated by the strategic chess match of a criminal trial, or you want to understand the origins of our current viral misinformation ecosystem, or you're simply trying to make sense of a defining cultural earthquake of the 21st century.
Yeah, there's something in it for everyone.
This film offers a lens you won't find anywhere else. It doesn't give you closure. It gives you clarity on how the machine operates.
This raises an important question, actually, something that sits at the very core of this cultural autopsy.
What's that?
If the documentary successfully proves that public perception and historical memory are so easily hijacked by the sheer volume of the media machine, it begs the question, can any individual who has reached the status of a global symbol ever truly receive a fair trial?
Oh.
Or, when they walk into a courtroom, is society only ever capable of judging the massive, complicated avatar they represent, while the actual human being sitting at the defense table remains completely invisible?